Hello, welcome back to A Boring Revolution, your number one news source for everything in regards to the Boring Company. Again, I'm very sorry for being away for such a long period of time. It is a very, very hectic time, but I am back with another live stream. Hello, everyone who's joining us live. We're going to have a good old chat today. Basically, I wanted to talk about the Boring Company and how it kind of sits in the picture in terms of other mass transit systems. So, let's have a look and see what I've prepared for you. So, where is the Boring opportunity? Where do we sit in terms of all the other systems that are out there at the moment? In terms of legacy systems, in terms of systems that are new, that are kind of being evolved. Certainly, this is a space that is absolutely ripe in terms of innovation. There's definitely big opportunities for innovation. Even things that traditional methods of transport like trains and buses, even cars as well, potentially have the opportunity to totally transform themselves and become the king of mass transit. And that is what we want the Boring Company to do, become the king of mass transit. So, what is the definition of mass transit? The transportation of large numbers of people by various means. TBC, the Boring Company, is part of a new breed of autonomous mass transit systems. That seems to be the flavour of the month at the moment. We're going away from having drivers, working 10-hour shifts. We're going to have, people drive, essentially going to have no one driving buses, no one driving trains, trams, even airplanes potentially in the long term, but certainly Boring Company, autonomous electric vehicles / shuttles. There's big competition out there as well, which I'm going to explore in a minute. The Boring Company has many, many strengths. Practically all strengths. It has some weaknesses. If you do a SWOT analysis of every system, you're going to find weaknesses. Remember, your weaknesses can also be your opportunities. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And your strengths can be a threat as well to you. So, we are very, very different, very, very innovative compared to a lot of these other systems, legacy systems as I like to call them. The Boring Company has its own niche in the growing carbon neutral market. So, I feel a bit hard. It's a bit difficult for me to say carbon neutral. It's very, very close to carbon neutral. I'm not really sure what is a better phrase for carbon neutral. I've been trying to rack my brain for the last half an hour, but I think carbon neutral is the best way to describe it, as we are very close to carbon neutral. Near carbon neutral might be a better phrase to use. How's competition from other resurgent competitors? Absolutely. So, trends. Where is the industry moving? Where is mass transit going? Is the Boring Company moving in the same trajectory? Or are we kind of going in our own trajectory? What are the other companies? What are the other systems? What innovation is out there to change, essentially, the world? So, a very significant move to electrification. Now, we've always had electric trains, but they've always been part of, a very small majority of the system. Certainly here in the UK, Germany and France, it's always been less than 30% of the entire rail network. That is obviously changing, but more significantly, we're getting more electric vehicles, more electric shuttles, and more electric buses. And that's only going to improve over the next 5 to 15 years. The restructuring of rural routes and their frequency. Now, this is certainly a trend in the UK where we have large bus franchises. They look at their system and they say, you know what? Buses that are going up north to, say, Rawtenstall, say, which is nearby here, you know what? We're going to reduce the frequency to every 3 hours rather than doing it every hour. And then sometimes they might even say, you know what? We're not even going to run a bus to that area. So essentially, there is they're making no money. There's no competition there. That is an area potentially where the Boring Company could go into a small town or village of 1,000 people, maybe slightly less than 1,000 people, and really break into that market and take those people away from cars, because the bus franchise system has disappeared, has given up because it's unprofitable, because they need a driver and they need to use lots of diesel. Therefore, we have an opportunity there. Emphasis on speed and shorter journeys. Certainly, in the big kind of grand schemes, the emphasis is on speed. What is the top speed of this system? What is the cruising speed of this system? How can we keep this train, this pod, this vehicle running at very, very high speeds, increase the speeds, reduce the amount of journeys, reduce the amount of intermediate stations. And that's where high-speed rail comes in. Hyperloop especially wants to get up to close to 600 miles per hour potentially. And obviously we've got maglev systems coming online in places like Japan and China. So people like speed. Speed sells. Investment in significant capacity improvements, trains, metro systems. We are constantly getting investment into metro systems. So LA Metro, for example, is getting a lot of new lines, new stations. In the UK, a lot of train stations are being extended. The train station that is literally 600 meters in that direction there is having a big platform extension so they can add more capacity, potentially add more trains per hour as well. Extension of existing legacy systems. So we've got our metro systems, heavy rail, constantly adding to the length. So, for example, LA Metro again, we're trying to make that a bigger system to touch more parts of LA, to take more people out of their cars. Governments are very, very keen to invest in these legacy systems to make them bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, they're trying to emulate what happened in New York over the last sort of 150 years, where they constantly expanded that system up to the point where if you live in New York, the only really viable way to get around is the subway. The abolition of fares altogether. Now, Luxembourg is running this kind of experiment whereby certain buses and certain trains and trams are free to use for everyone all times of day. And essentially you pay for that with your taxes rather than having to pay a fare. Ridership numbers has gone up incredibly. Is that possible in other parts of the world? I'm not too sure. Potentially that is a threat for the Boring Company if governments start to move to that model of zero fares. However, I personally think that in big countries with more than 20 million inhabitants, that is unlikely to happen. Move towards 100% autonomous driverless systems. Everything from trains to trams, buses, even jets, VTOL jets, 100% driverless, 100% autonomous. There's no need to pay your driver, 30, 40,000 pounds a year to work in that job. You can get rid of him and you can just run the system with essentially autonomous computers, and therefore it cuts out an immense amount of cost. Makes everything 10 times more viable because the costs are reduced so significantly. So, the competition. What is out there? What is the competition for the Boring Company? What potentially could cut down on the Boring Company profits, could eat away at the number of passengers using the Boring Company system? Because hell, I know that these systems are not going to stand still. They're going to react to the Boring Company and try and compete with it. So metro and light rail systems. So we have Metrolink here in Manchester. We have BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit System. They're kind of your local systems in your local city. Again, a lot of government money is going into them. They don't want them to fail. If anything, they want them to expand and increase ridership numbers. I consider them personally our biggest threat in terms of could they potentially expand to such an extent. And they've also, the key thing to remember is they're already there. They essentially have the monopoly already. Simply by reducing fares, they could actually potentially push the Boeing company out of an area and maybe even bankrupt it if they cut fares enough and kept people out of the Boeing company system. Legacy rail, certainly here in the UK, legacy rail is getting very strong. The amount of people using legacy rail in the UK has been increasing significantly over the last 18 years. I know Amtrak is not exactly doing very, very well, but here in the UK, franchises are expanding. They're actually opening up old routes that were once not profitable, and they're because of the beaching cuts, and they're putting in new track in those areas and expanding the system and putting in new trains. Immense amount of investment in legacy rail in quite a few countries in Europe as well. High-speed rail, lots and lots and lots of high-speed rail. Personally, I don't think the Boeing company is competition for high-speed rail. If anything, we are the perfect complement to high-speed rail. Now, you might wonder, well, why are you saying that, Will? Well, how do you get to the high-speed rail station? Are you going to drive there and then get on a train? What about if you could get on a Boeing company pod and get to your nearest high-speed rail station in under 10 minutes, if not less, and then when you get to your destination, there is a pod waiting for you to take you to your office or your meeting or wherever you intend to go. So they are technically competition, but I believe that we could work with them rather than against them. Maglev systems, again, very similar to high-speed rail. We can complement them. They're not necessarily competition. For journeys of more than 150 miles, maglev and high-speed rail are the go-to systems. I personally don't believe the Boeing company should be building tunnels that are more than 120 miles long. I think that for distances of more than 200 miles, you just cannot beat a high-speed rail system or a maglev system because they're just so much faster, so much more efficient, and they've also got the advantage of capacity. But again, we can complement these systems and make money on the back of their passengers. Taxis and buses, again, I'm not really sure it's competition, but they do turn over a lot of money. People like Uber and Lyft and all the traditional operators like black cabs here in the UK, again, they're diesel or electric. Potentially we could put these guys out of business very, very quickly if we had quite a large system in a city. And to be honest with you, I'd be very glad to put a lot of taxi companies out of business. Level 4 autonomous shuttles, again, similar to taxis, but no driver. These are our startups. These are the actual people that in the strange kind of way, even though they don't really seem to have the advantages, they are the tech people. They are your Googles, they are your Amazons, they are your startups in Silicon Valley. They're the people that can react quicker to what you're doing and try to maybe circumvent your system or undercut you. So the emphasis should be on them. What are they doing? How can we put these guys out of business very quickly? Because if they can hang in there, they potentially could cause us some damage. Subway systems. I think out of all the systems that I'm worried about, these probably come in number 2, simply because they're very well established, very high capacity, reasonable speeds. There's quite a lot of stops along the way, and obviously they just move a ton of passengers. And people are very loyal to subway systems because a lot of people have used them for many, many, many years, and they are extremely efficient. But the key advantage of the Boeing company is we can run at 155 miles per hour, where these subway systems are limited to around 60 miles per hour. I know the Metrolink system in the UK here in Manchester is limited to 50 miles per hour. That is the actual maximum speed they can do. So if they are going long distances, Manchester to Rochdale, it's going to take a long, long time for them to get there, whereas our system can get there in less than 10 minutes. And then we've got all the other kind of systems. Hyperloop. The big question is Hyperloop the real deal or is it pure hype? I'm still undecided on this. I support innovation. However, whenever I seem to watch a Hyperloop presentation, certainly over the last 3 years, I'm just seeing a lot of marketers, a lot of people marketing the system rather than trying to sell the technology. And I want to see it built. They need to build a system, just a small system, and then prove it works, and then hopefully they can expand it. I wish them all the best, but I really don't see them as any kind of competition at the moment. And again, we could probably complement them. Funnily enough, in Las Vegas, we have the monorail. The Las Vegas monorail, it's not really that great competition for the Boeing company, but it is there potentially. There are decisions that are being made to extend it. I'm very confident that once the Boeing company gets going, we could probably put the monorail to sleep and prevent it being extended, because it'd be a huge waste of money. Skyway's kind of similar thing to monorail. It's a company based in, I think it's Belarus. It's this one here. I don't know if you can see that there. They use these pre-stressed cables inside this these concrete kind of beams with trusses underneath. Very kind of innovative, low-cost system. Use kind of small pods. Have some high-speed options as well. Again, they need to build it. They are building a system in the UAE, and hopefully that does well. VTOL, another startup called Lilium is building VTOL. Their jets can get up to, I believe, 175 miles per hour. However, they only have a range of about 100 miles. So I think certainly for business executives, VTOL could become the go-to option if Lilium does well. However, again, they've got to prove it. They recently had a large fire in one of the jets, so there are problems associated with using such high density batteries in a powerhouse system like that. So, here's the big question. Here's the question you should ask yourself as well. Will the Boeing company conquer all? Will they conquer all these systems? No. There's always going to be buses and taxis and definitely trains. I think it'd be ludicrous to rip up the entire rail network. But what I think happens is the Boeing company takes, 20% of rail passengers, takes 50% of bus passengers, and then takes a good, several thousand people, if not, 100,000 people out of the cars in any given city, and kind of, develops its own little niche in the market where everyone kind of lives alongside each other. But the Boeing company is the big player. And we're talking many, several thousand people are being moved every hour in pods, and potentially a lot more than that. And then obviously those kind of systems, once they've been proved successful in places like Las Vegas, could move to places like Dallas and Houston, LA, Seattle, Boston, these kind of cities, and really take a very, very large percentage of the market. Well in excess of 55%, I'd imagine. It has a plethora of advantages. Here are the advantages. First of all, it is suitable for the vast majority of journeys under 90 miles. Obviously, if you're doing a journey of less than 2 miles, I'd recommend walking or cycling. But for the majority of cases, you just can't beat the speed of a Boeing company system. Journeys more than 150 miles, it's got to be high-speed rail, it's got to be maglev, potentially VTOL, or even Hyperloop. Small marketing budget. The Boeing company doesn't need to do any marketing whatsoever. Not even 1 cent. All they need to do is Elon Musk go on Twitter and say, hey, I'm opening a new system in, let's say, Phoenix. It's going to be 155 miles per hour. It's going to be 4 tunnels totaling 80 miles. And we're going to do this. What do you think about it? And straight away, that's front page news on every tech website and in page 5 or 6 in most of the newspapers. And there you go. Everyone knows about it. Everyone's excited by it. and we don't need to spend thousands of thousands marketing it. Lower comparable build costs than other systems. That is the big advantage of the Boring Company. We don't need to spend millions and millions of dollars building bridges and buying land and building huge underground stations. We are going to be massively cheaper to build, more cost effective than pretty much every other system, other than maybe like a bus system, which only requires some bus stops, but is nowhere near as fast or efficient. Plus, we don't require a driver, so we save a lot of costs in terms of running the system as well. So massive advantages in that area. Also, built using privately sourced equity rather than public funds. We're not taking money from taxpayers. We're not taking money from some kind of, specially assigned tax that's going to acquire the money to build the system. No. We're going to acquire money by raising it privately or via loans, and then we're going to run a system that is actually going to make money. This system will make money. Unlike all the other systems that I've just mentioned above, 98% of them will never, ever make any money, no matter if they increase passenger numbers 60%. It's just, they're not laid out like that. So we are a system that can make money and can raise money privately very easily. 155 mile per hour top speed and very high throughput. Because we've got a high top speed and because we've got a very high throughput, this system potentially could be expanded across an entire city, could cover every borough in a big city. Just give you an example, let's say somewhere like Boston. Boston is a big city. Dallas, Houston, those are the perfect kind of cities. We could cover every single acre of that city. We could move pretty much the entire population at any one time and do it in a very speedy manner without congestion. That is, again, another massive advantage. Let's take a look at the competition in terms of their throughput. So we've got my local system, the Manchester Metrolink, 4,120 people per hour in one direction. We have a bus system in Nottingham. This is kind of like a rapid bus system. 2,340 people per hour in one direction. Here is our big competition. This is essentially the benchmark for what a modern metro system, and it's more like a heavy rail system, Thameslink, I'd say, rather than a metro system. So this is kind of your modern heavy rail system, Thameslink. 42,000 people per hour, and we have high-speed rail here at 20,000 people per hour. I think with enough tunnels and a good few thousand pods, we could easily move 50, 60,000 people per hour if we have enough pods. Now, this is saying it does it on one track, but it's not like they can keep adding tracks to this system. They are limited to the 2 tracks that they've already got. The Boring Company has no such limits. We could potentially have, let's say 18 tunnels. We could have 18 tunnels under a road, and we could just run pods through them 24/7. That's another big advantage. We can run this system 24/7 without drivers. We can change how the system operates at certain hours so that only 1 or 2 people can use a pod. Therefore, it is safe to use at night time. Summary. I know I've been banging on a bit here, but let's just go back to what we've just said over the past 20 minutes. So, ultra efficient. The Boring Company is ultra efficient in all areas. First of all, when you build it, super cost effective to build. It's fast to build, and the actual build costs, because we're not using that many stations, and we've got our new method of boring where we come up at an angle, say 30-degree angle, so we don't need to worry about building ramps. Super cost effective compared to metro systems, subways, and light heavy rail. Also, maintenance costs are going to be extremely low because this is a new system built to modern technical standards, And running costs, again, ultra efficient, no drivers. We're going to use electricity, 100% renewable energy, so our costs to operate are going to be super, super low. Competition, with scale, if we have, 50, 60, 70 miles of tunnels, we are going to absolutely obliterate the competition. Buses, tubes, trains, without them altering their prices to try and undercut us, we will essentially put them out of business. And what will happen is the government will have to come in to kind of prop them up. That is the only way they will survive. And that is essentially what will happen. With scale, we are unbeatable. And when I say scale, I mean 80, 90, 100 miles of tunnels, if not double or triple that. IPO opportunity. Now, I know I've talked about IPOs before, but here's another way of thinking about it. What about if each system, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Dallas, Austin, each was an IPO opportunity? Once the system is up and running and making money, we then raise more money with an IPO, and then we use that money to expand the system. So it's a constant cycle of us issuing shares, expanding the system, issuing more shares for Dallas, expanding the system, issuing more shares for Dallas, expanding the system again, and that's how we achieve exponential growth. And then we can take money from that system in Dallas and apply it to a system in Phoenix, and then build a new system in Phoenix without requiring any money other than our own money. So again, another massive advantage of the Boring Company system. Carbon neutral. Again, I'll say we are near carbon neutral. Obviously, there is carbon emissions in producing the batteries for the pods and producing the metal. But because we use renewable energy, and because essentially the vehicles have got 1 million miles of running, and the batteries, are going to last, 4 or 5 years, even with all the heavy use, we're extremely efficient in that area. Governments are pushing for carbon neutral, 0% greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, again, we have a massive advantage over other systems because we're starting from scratch. They're going to have to get rid of all their drivers and all the old legacy equipment, which is burning a lot of fossil fuels. Okay, we're done. Done. Thank you for joining me today. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll do a Q&A at the end if you've got any questions. Happy to answer anything other than the obvious thing, which we don't really want to talk about. Join me on Discord, Twitter, and Instagram. Links are down below. Appreciate some feedback in the comments below. Tell me what you think about the video, what you liked, what you disliked. Thank you to all my Patreons who continue to support this channel and help me build up my system here and get better equipment and hopefully go to Las Vegas if I can get on a plane in the next 8 or 9 months. So we got Charles Fox, Ashley Hill, Mike McLean, David McKay, Christopher Kinsey, and Jin Knapp. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Again, please like and subscribe. Okay, wow. A lot of questions. I'm going to work my way through them. Feel free to ask more questions as I go through. I'm sorry to hear that, Johnny. I hope that you can rearrange that later on in the year, maybe into the late summer. I feel your pain, my mate. I had a lot of problems myself. Super excited for these tunnels. We'll definitely make a trip to Vegas with family to try them out. Excellent. Really hope you do that. I hopefully should be there towards Christmas time. Fuel agnostic, carbon neutral ready. It sure is, my mate. Traditional mass transit is a huge source of inequality. Everyone deserves point-to-point travel, and the Boring Company loops will deliver that. I hope so. Hopefully, at one point, we can literally connect every single acre of land in a city to the loop network. Obviously, we can still use existing roads, but where possible, we can have ramps going down into the tunnel network. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah. Well, that's a big advantage for the Boeing company, is that they're going into an area with very low competition. A bit like how Tesla went in to the automotive market, and there was literally no one else thinking about electric vehicles other than Rivian. In this case, there's a lot of legacy companies or legacy systems that can be essentially put out of business and replaced with the Boeing company. Time is money, Tomahawk. It sure is, bro. And I'm feeling the pain today, I tell you. Seeing people wait at the bus stop is depressing, yeah. Yes, it's a great shame. I used to work with someone who used to catch the bus every day, and despite him only living around 6 or 7 miles away from where we worked, I lived a good 20 miles away. He was literally late nearly every day, so buses just don't work. They're just very, very slow, having to stop all the time, and expensive. That's why they're cutting a lot of routes in the UK. Yeah. Heavy rail in the US has just absolutely, capitulated, really. Apparently, Amtrak is going to have lots of services cut over the next 4 years. And that's just going to obliterate the service. Yeah, to some extent I do agree with that. We should definitely have a lot more cycle lanes. If we can put vehicles underground, that means the roads on the surface can become bike lanes. Or at least some of it. Yeah, it's just not viable, is it? I mean, it is fun looking out the window, but I mean, doing that for 3 days, no. Yeah. Yes, that's another one. The London Underground is it's really bad. It's almost as bad as being at the surface next to a busy road. I don't know how they fix that, unless they can filter the air. Yeah. If you've not already done so, follow a company called Lilium. I think it's one L, Lilium, Lilium. They've got a really interesting piece of tech, and Hyundai are building a VTOL as well, which looks quite promising. Yes. The Boeing company will be mainly kind of like a shuttle service with autonomous electric vehicles, and you'll book them with an app. There may be the option for the public to put their vehicles in the system, but it'll be a lot more expensive, and it just won't be worth it when you can sit in a comfortable bus with 12 other people, and it won't be that crammed. You'll have lots of room, and it'll be very comfortable because it'll be a short journey. Yeah. Oh. You know what? As an engineer, it is so embarrassing to see the state of some of the bridges in the USA. They are literally, I mean, half of them wouldn't be open in the UK if they were in the same condition. Okay? They would have torn them down 20, 30 years ago. But the US is keeping open bridges that should be condemned. They're actually changing the regulations so some of these bridges can remain open. That is how dire the situation is. Until they spend, hundreds, maybe even $1 trillion repairing all these bridges, the country's going to suffer economically, because some of these trucks are having to take very long ways around to avoid some of these bridges. It's an absolute joke. Yeah, so, I mean, just to clarify, I've never worked on a tunnel project. my experience is in the water industry, so building actually water treatment works. I worked on some 3 high-rise buildings, apartments. I also worked on a large academy, school, various other schemes. So I've never actually built or worked on a tunnel scheme, but I have the background from my degree and obviously what I've built in the past. I worked on a very, very large basement in Leeds, which requires some significant groundworks. So I've kind of got an understanding of what is required to build a tunnel, and I could obviously apply that knowledge to the Boring Company. But what the Boring Company is doing is totally new in terms of their new tunneling method. And I believe once they apply that to another scheme in Las Vegas, that is going to prove to be an absolute game changer in terms of how fast they can turn TBMs around. But yeah, it's so interesting to be part of this whole technology field at the moment. Question. Let's have a look. What do you think the longest length of a passenger tunnel is with proof rock diameter? Would it be different from you? Yeah, so I don't think any, not that I can think of any. Well, you know what? Say that, that's what. There are some parts of the tube in London that are the same diameter, or if not slightly less than the Boring Company. So I'd imagine of the same diameter, maybe a few miles. But there are utility tunnels of a similar diameter running underneath mountains and underneath rivers that are, you know, dozens, maybe 20, 30, 40 miles long. Maybe slightly less than that. I mean, it could do. I just don't think the money's there to do that. I think the money is building a mass transit system for that tunnel and then charging people to use it, and then you've got a continuous source of revenue. So that tunnel is going to make you tons and tons of money for the next 100 or so, 150 years through the fares and through maybe like if you run it like a toll road. So I mean, they could do. I mean, if they had enough machines and enough people who could actually run a tunnel boring machine, unless it actually bores itself, it's you know, it's powered by AI. But I mean, it's all very possible. I think they should kind of expand into multiple areas because then it makes them recession proof. No, I've not seen. I am following someone who does videos, but I just don't have the time to watch it. I wonder what they're doing. But just off the top of my head, I think Giga 3. So Giga China, yeah, or Giga Shanghai. Shanghai. I think that was sat on CFA piles, sat on pile caps, and then they used a kind of steel truss system for the roof, which is quite a really kind of fast, progressive way to build a factory. And obviously they proved that because they got it done in, 10.5 months. Podcast specifically designed to go on. Yeah, so I think they'll develop a kind of minibus that specifically works for the Boring Company, but then they might also sell that as a vehicle to consumers. It'll be a couple of foot longer than the Model X. I mean, it could be sold to the private sector, maybe to schools as like a school bus, like an autonomous school bus. I mean, there's definitely opportunities to sell it to other people than just the Boring Company. On the Boring. Yeah, so let me just clarify something as well. The Boring Company at the moment is not intending to build a Hyperloop system. So the Boring Company is building its kind of underground road tunnels for its pods. But in terms of Hyperloop, the Boring Company would probably act as a contractor for someone like Hyperloop One or Virgin Hyperloop One or Transpod or any of the other Hyperloop companies, rather than actually being, you know, the main developer. They would be essentially a subcontractor. Yeah, I'll definitely watch Jason's videos, Johnny. I'll try and find them later on after this feed. Okay, guys. I think we've answered too many questions. We've gone on 41 minutes, which is quite a long time. Thank you for everyone joining us. I'm going to try and do quite a few videos this week. Hopefully, you can all tune in and join me. Thank you, everyone who has joined on the feed today, and especially everyone who comes back regularly. Okay. Remember, guys, don't be boring, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow. Thank you for joining me.